Fire towers saved lives for nearly a century. Isolated stations where rangers spent weeks alone, scanning the horizon for smoke. Most were decommissioned in the 80s when aerial surveillance replaced human observation. But decommissioned doesn't mean abandoned. Blackstone Fire Tower in Olympic National Forest still stands, 60 feet of rusted steel and rotting wood. The latter was removed in 1989. The windows were boarded in 1991. The radio equipment was disconnected in 1995. But every summer, dispatch receives calls from Blackstone Tower. And the voices on those calls are rangers who worked there, rangers who have been dead for years. So when people ask why the rangers will not discuss the old fire tower, the answer is simple. The tower will not stop discussing them. Ranger Marcus Webb kept the proof on his desk. It sat just to the right of his blotter, beside a chipped white coffee mug and a stack of maps. A standard-issue handheld radio, scratched along the edges, antenna slightly bent. Across the speaker grill, someone had taped a strip of yellowing paper. The words were written in black marker, block letters pressed deep enough to dent the fibers. Do not respond to tower transmissions. He did not have to read it. After 22 years in Olympic National Forest, the sentence lived in his head the way trail routes and ridge names did. Still, his eyes found it on quiet afternoons, when the rain softened against the windows and static whispered in the background. Decommissioned did not mean silent. Not out here. Not for Blackstone. To new rangers, the Forest Handbook talked about lightning protocols, backcountry permits, radio call signs, the right way to speak to a lost hiker. None of it mentioned Blackstone Fire Tower. That part came later, after a season or two, when someone had earned their place around the evening table in the break room. If the tower calls, an older ranger would say, "You log the time and content, then you change the subject, you do not answer, you do not go." The written version was less dramatic, one line buried in a regional directive, framed as a safety measure about unstable structures and unauthorized transmissions. Marcus had read that memo the year he started. Back then, Blackstone was just another name on a map, tagged as a historical structure, no public access. The tower had not always been a problem. Once, it had been a career. In August of 1987, on a clear evening, Howard Mitchell sat alone at the small wooden desk inside the cabin at the top of Blackstone. He had worked fire towers for 35 years, 12 of them on that ridge. The cabin was a square of glass and wood above the forest, walls lined with maps, a logbook open under his hand. He wrote in a careful, steady script. Final observation shift. Clear skies, no smoke, no incidents. Blackstone Tower operational 1934 to 1987, 53 years of service. Thousands of fires spotted, hundreds of lives saved. He paused, listening to the familiar creak of the floorboards in the wind. He knew every sound the tower made, the tick of cooling metal at night, the low hum when a front rolled in off the Pacific. This box of timber and steel had been his home longer than his own house in town. Tomorrow, he wrote, someone else will look at these ridges, someone in a plane or helicopter. They will see what I see, but they will not know it the way I know it. Outside the horizon was a jagged line of dark ridges, all quiet under the last light. He set the pen down and drew one final breath of the cabin's dry, sun-baked air. I am the last person who will ever stand watch from this tower. Final entry, Howard Mitchell, August 31st, 1987. Blackstone Tower, signing off. 2 years later, the tower spoke again. In October of 1989, Ranger Thomas Chen was driving the narrow service road that wound below Blackstone Ridge. The day was cool and bright, the kind of early autumn afternoon that made the moss glow and the air taste metallic and clean. The radio at his shoulder was a low hiss of open channel. At 10:23, the static cleared. Blackstone Tower, routine check-in. Clear skies, no smoke visible. Chen frowned. His hand moved to the radio without thinking. Blackstone Tower has been decommissioned, he said. Identify yourself. There was a brief crackle, then a voice he knew as well as any in his memory. Howard Mitchell, Blackstone Tower. Clear skies, no smoke visible, routine check-in. Chen's grip tightened on the handset. He had carried Howard's casket that spring in Olympia. He could still feel the weight of it in his shoulders. Howard, he said slowly, you retired 2 years ago. Where are you transmitting from? Blackstone Tower, the voice replied. Where else would I be? Been here 12 years. In the dispatch office, a clerk flipped through personnel files and confirmed what Chen already knew. Howard Mitchell had died in March. The funeral had been well attended. Thomas Chen had stood in the front row. The call continued for another minute. The voice asked him to come up to the tower, said there was something he needed to see. By the time Chen reached the base of Blackstone, the channel was empty again. The tower rose out of the trees, a rusted skeleton against the sky. The bottom 15 feet of ladder were gone, cut clean away. The platform above stood empty, boards gray with age. There was no way for anyone to be up there. No climbing gear. No sign of recent use. He stood there for a long time, watching the silent cabin. Later, in his log, he wrote, quote, 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 mimicking Ranger protocol. Marcus knew better. So did everyone who had worked with Howard. Chen had called it interference. But every Ranger who had known Mitchell said the same thing when they read the transcript and heard the tape. They all recognized his voice. It should have ended with Howard's final entry. Instead, that was just the tower's first goodbye. The years the tower wouldn't stay silent. Marcus spread the transmission logs across his desk like a map of something he was still trying to understand. Stacks of thin paper, coffee-stained in places, sat beside photocopied contractor reports and clipped memos. The logs stretched back decades, each line a small record of something that should not have happened. A soft drizzle tapped against the ranger station windows as he turned to the oldest report in the stack, September 4th, 1987. It was the first sign that Blackstone would refuse to stay quiet. The contractors who had climbed the tower that morning were only supposed to remove the lower section of the ladder. Public safety, the order had said. Prevent access, deter thrill-seekers, cut the bottom 15 feet, leave the rest. Simple. But when they reached the platform, they found fresh boot prints in the dust. Not the old, scattered impressions of animals or shifting debris. Intentional steps. A full pattern. The heel and tread perfectly clear. Walking from the cabin door to the southwest corner, the observation spot used by Rangers for 50 years. No inspection was scheduled that day. No one had logged a visit since Mitchell's final shift. The contractors assumed a Ranger had gone up early. They wrote it off without comment. Marcus set the paper down, knowing what they didn't. No Ranger alive had climbed that tower after August 1987. The transmissions began 2 years later. Between 1989 and 1995, Blackstone Tower checked in 23 times. Always the same opening phrase, Blackstone Tower, routine check-in. Sometimes it added, clear skies or smoke visible, standard firewatch protocol from a playbook long out of use. And sometimes the voice asked for a specific Ranger by name, as if choosing exactly who it wanted. The voices changed, but the pattern did not. Ranger Elena Vasquez, who had an eye for detail sharper than most, spent 3 months compiling the incidents. She logged every call and cross-referenced each voice. 13 transmissions matched Howard Mitchell, who had died in 1989. 4 were recognized as Robert Keene, who had retired in 1978 and passed away in 1993. 3 matched Sarah Ortiz, who was alive but living in Arizona at the time of the calls. 2 sounded like James Park, dead since 1956. One remained unidentifiable. Vasquez noticed what no one else had bothered to put together. All of these Rangers were tied to Blackstone Tower in life, and in every case, the callers were nowhere near Olympic National Forest. Worse were the references to events the callers could not have known. Mitchell's voice congratulated Chen on his promotion, a promotion earned 2 years after Mitchell died. Keene's voice commented on the new digital system, even though he had not held a radio since the late 70s. Park, dead decades earlier, used fire codes that had not existed until the 1970s. Marcus leaned back in his chair. This was where the educational part of his own briefings always came in, because people love to assume radios glitched or signals bounced, or old recordings got trapped in wires like some ghost in a machine. None of that fit. Ranger radios ran on VHF frequencies. On good days, a handheld carried about 2 to 5 miles. Vehicle units reached farther. But every single one required 3 things: a working radio, a power source, and a live hand holding down the transmit button. A dead-key transmission, a stuck mic, created a steady hiss or static. No speech, never a conversation. Blackstone's calls were crisp, clean, responsive. In 1995, the Park Service tried to eliminate the problem by gutting the tower entirely. Contractors hauled out every piece of equipment: transceiver, antenna, wiring, battery backups. The cabin interior was stripped bare. The next morning, the contractors reported finding fresh boot prints on the platform again, dust, displaced, distinct patterns, no climbing gear, no ladder, and no explanation. 3 weeks later, Ranger David Ortega heard the tower call. "They took the radio," the voice said. "Doesn't matter. I can still reach you." Ortega did not return to Blackstone Ridge after that. 2 months later, he filed a transfer request. He never said much about it, only that he'd started hearing his own voice in the static. Marcus closed the last log. He said he left before the tower could perfect his voice. Those who climbed. For a while, the rule was simple: do not answer Blackstone. Rangers repeated it the way people repeated things they never wanted to test. But some eventually decided that not answering was not enough. They wanted proof, real proof, that nobody stood on that empty platform 60 feet above the forest floor. That was how Ranger Sarah Drummond ended up climbing Blackstone Tower in the summer of 1997. She was 8 years into her career, a capable climber with a stubborn streak her colleagues admired and quietly feared. When she announced she was going up to settle this nonsense once and for all, Marcus remembered trying to talk her out of it. "The ladder's been gone for 8 years, he told her. "The structure's compromised. There's nothing to see." She only smiled and checked the buckles on her climbing harness. At 14:30, Drummond reached the platform. Her radio captured each step of her inspection, her voice steady at first, then tightening. "Platform's intact," she reported. "Dust everywhere. Hasn't been disturbed in years." A short pause. "Wait, these footprints, multiple sets, different sizes." More static, then her breath catching. "They start here at the southwest corner, but they don't lead anywhere. Not to the door, not to the ladder, just here." Like someone appeared, stood watch, and disappeared. She approached the observation point, the place where Mitchell had once spent long hours with binoculars and a notepad. The view had always been remarkable. Mountains rolling into the haze, valleys stretching like green seams below. "I can see why he loved this place," she murmured. "The ridgeline goes on forever. If there was smoke anywhere, you'd catch it." Then, very softly, "I think I see something. Southwest, maybe 8 miles. The next voice on the recording did not belong to her. "Blackstone Tower to dispatch. Smoke sighting confirmed. Southwest sector. Coordinates to follow." It was a man's voice, confident, routine. Dispatch identified it instantly. Howard Mitchell. Drummond's next transmission was frantic. "I didn't call that in. There's no one else up here. I heard him, right next to me, but the platform is empty." When she scrambled down, she found her own footprints, leading back to the ladder rope, and beside the southwest corner, a new set of prints had appeared. Fresh, crisp. The same direction she had been facing. Fire crews later found an illegal campfire exactly where the transmission pointed. Sarah Drummond requested transfer 3 weeks later. 6 years passed before another ranger climbed Blackstone. This time it was Lisa Nakamura in 2003, sent for a structural safety assessment. She reached the platform with a clipboard and a camera, intending only to document the tower's condition. "The door to the cabin is still locked," she reported. "Original padlock, windows boarded, no signs of forced entry." Then she stopped speaking. Marcus had listened to the recording more times than he wished. "Footsteps," she whispered. "Inside the cabin. Someone's walking in there." She called out a warning. The footsteps halted. A moment later, a voice drifted through the wood. "Come on in, Lisa," it said. "Door's open." But the door was locked. She tried it. The padlock held fast, cold and untouched. Nakamura recommended the tower be demolished. The request was denied for budgetary reasons. Marcus often explained to new rangers why climbing abandoned towers was a bad idea, even without the hauntings. Corroded steel. Rotten boards. The risk of falling through weathered planks and breaking a leg, or worse. Rescue from remote terrain could take hours, even in good conditions. That was why the tower carried the historical structure no public access label. Not just for history's sake, but because a neglected tower could turn deadly for anyone who tried to explore it. "Never climb an abandoned fire tower," he told rookies. "Gear can't save you from a collapsing beam, and you'd be surprised how long it takes to carry an injured ranger out of backcountry terrain." But the danger at Blackstone went beyond rust and rotten boards. Drummond's prints that appeared and vanished. Nakamura's voice behind a locked door. Smoke sightings accurate to the mile. The tower was not just speaking. It was hosting someone, or something, on that platform and inside that cabin. By 2003, Blackstone had done what ghosts were not supposed to do. It had produced verifiable, repeatable results. It was doing the job it had been retired from. And the next phase would only get stranger. Night watch at 60 feet. The first time Marcus decided to place a recorder on the Blackstone platform, he did it the way someone lights a match in a dark room, expecting nothing, bracing for everything. It was June 2008, a quiet morning on Blackstone Ridge, the trees still wet from night fog. There was no ladder, no radio, no way for anyone to reach the platform. But he climbed with ropes and anchors, easing himself up the frame until he could swing onto the boards. The cabin door was locked. The windows were still boarded. The air felt undisturbed, cold in a way that did not belong to early summer. He set the recorder on the floor near the southwest corner, checked the battery, and climbed back down. 72 hours of motion-activated audio. He did not expect much. 3 days later, he retrieved the recorder. The device was right where he had left it. The audio was not. Night 1 began with wind and the occasional groan of old wood settling in the cool air. Then, at 21:47, heavy boots stepped onto the platform. Not climbing from the side, not moving from the ladder cut, just appearing. Heel, toe, shift of weight. Marcus felt his stomach tighten as he listened. At 22:03, a low voice spoke. "Still here," it said, "still watching." The cadence matched Mitchell's, the calm focus he had always used during routine reports. Marcus had not heard that voice in person since he was a junior ranger, but he knew it. 2 minutes later, the boots faded, not toward the edge, upward, as if walking into the sky. Night 2 was worse. At 14:22, with daylight pouring across the ridge, the recorder picked up the creaking of wood under a light step, then a woman's voice, gentle and steady. Clear skies, no smoke, routine check. Marcus recognized the tone from archives. Sarah Ortiz, long retired, living in Arizona. A crackle of static followed, radio noise without a radio, then the voice again, closer. This is Blackstone Tower, all clear. Night 3 held the strangest sound of all. At 3:15, multiple people walked onto the platform at once. 3, maybe 4 distinct gait patterns. Their voices overlapped in fragments. They're listening now. Time's different up here. Tower remembers. Then, at 3:18, everything cut to absolute silence. Not fading wind, not slowed footsteps, just nothing. Marcus stopped the playback there. Footsteps that began in the middle of the platform. Voices that referenced the investigation itself. A tower with no equipment reproducing crystal-clear audio. It felt less like haunting and more like eavesdropping from the wrong side of reality. The recordings were strange enough, but the next documented event shattered whatever certainty the Rangers still held. In 2012, Ranger Jake Morrison received an emergency call from Blackstone Tower at 2:40 in the morning. The voice said there was fire visible, coordinates to follow. Morrison chose duty over protocol and climbed. When he reached the platform, the cabin door stood open and lantern-colored light spilled across the boards. Inside, a man sat at a desk with a logbook, uniform crisp and decades out of date. He looked up, solid and unmistakably real. Southwest, the man said, 10 miles. Lightning strike tomorrow around noon. The next day at 12:17, lightning hit dry timber exactly 10 miles southwest. The fire burned 40 acres before containment. Morrison requested a permanent desk assignment within the month. Marcus often explained how unpredictable individual lightning strikes were, even with modern forecasting. Rangers used dryness indices, fuel conditions, and weather models to determine fire risk, but no one could predict the exact moment and location of a strike in a specific valley. Blackstone could. 7 times out of 8, its predictions had been right. Statistically, that bordered on impossible. He laid the facts out plainly in his notes. 87 transmissions documented, 31 fire sightings, 23 confirmed, 8 predictive reports, 6 rangers who climbed the tower, all of whom requested transfer afterward. Blackstone might have been dead on paper, but it was not silent in practice. In 2018, a transmission came through with a tight, urgent message. Immediate threat to campground, the voice said. Smoke visible. Protocol was followed, the call was ignored. 20 minutes later, hikers dialed in the same fire. 3 tents were destroyed. 2 people were injured. The tower had tried to warn them, and the Rangers had followed the rule instead. What the tower refuses to let go of. The ranger station was quiet, in the way only deep forest buildings could be. Wood settling, radios murmuring faint static, the distant rush of wind through Douglas fir. Marcus sat alone at his desk, the overhead lamp casting a circle of warm light over a stack of papers he had read too many times. On top lay Park Service Directive OLY 201347, its edges curled from handling. Beneath the printed protocols, several hands had added their own warnings in fading pencil. One note, pressed into the margin so hard it nearly tore the page, read, "If the tower calls you by name, don't go." Marcus traced the letters with a thumb before setting the directive aside. Rules had a way of shifting in the Blackstone district, becoming something heavier than policy. And this rule, unofficial, unacknowledged, had been copied into notebooks and tacked above radios for good reason. The official guidance was simple. Do not respond to transmissions identifying as Blackstone Tower. Do not climb the structure. Do not approach after dark. If a door stands open, do not enter. If coordinates are broadcast, verify by other means. There was no mention of why. No reference to the voices, the footprints, or the impossible predictions. And yet the Rangers followed those rules with near-religious precision. Marcus leaned back in his chair, listening to the quiet hum of the station. The real truth, the one nobody ever put in writing, was that they did not ignore Blackstone. Not really. They logged every call. They cross-checked the coordinates. They monitored the ridges the tower warned about. Even the most skeptical Rangers, the ones who rolled their eyes at ghost stories and technical impossibilities, seemed incapable of treating a Blackstone transmission as meaningless. Because sometimes a fire really did flare where the tower said it would, and sometimes a campground really was in danger. And sometimes ignoring the call meant being 20 minutes too late. Marcus watched the radio on his desk, the battered unit with the yellowing note taped across its front. In all the years he had worked these mountains, he had never fully decided what Blackstone was. A haunting? A glitch? A gathering place for the dead? Or simply a job that had never ended? Blackstone had been built in 1934 so that someone would always be watching the ridges. Maybe the mistake had been assuming that responsibility ended when a signature retired it. He drew a slow breath and shifted into the tone he used during backcountry presentations, the practical, grounded voice he trusted more than the investigative one. People underestimated how easily wildfires could start, a single ember from a poorly extinguished ring, a cigarette tucked under a rock, a lightning strike in dry timber. He had seen hikers dismiss a faint column of smoke as someone else's problem, and campers swear a small fire could not possibly run. They were usually wrong. So he always taught the same basics. Check fire danger ratings before entering the backcountry. Learn the smell of a developing fire, the sharp, resinous bite in the air. Use multiple warning systems, apps, alerts, park notices. If smoke becomes visible, evacuate immediately. Do not wait. Never assume a campfire is out unless you have drowned it, stirred it, and drowned it again. Most of the fires Blackstone warned about were preventable. Some were caught early only because someone took the warning seriously. He folded the directive closed and stacked the logs neatly. Outside, the forest grew darker, the last light slipping behind the ridge where the tower stood against the sky, nothing more than a narrow silhouette. Marcus let the quiet stretch for a long moment. Then he spoke, barely above a whisper. Blackstone was built so somebody would always be watching these ridges. Maybe the mistake was thinking that job should end when a form gets signed in an office. He reached over and switched off the lamp, leaving the station in half shadow. So we don't discuss the old fire tower, he said. We just log the calls, check the coordinates, and let it work. He stood, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the door. Before leaving, he glanced once more at the radio. If you're ever camping in Olympic, he said softly, and a ranger shows up early to clear a campground, just know this. Someone 60 feet up might have seen the smoke before you ever smelled it. Someone who hasn't come down since 1987.